Hello and welcome to the Play Creators Conference. I'm Billy from Mojo Nation and I'm delighted to be joined by Julia Posen, Head of Development at Gamepath. How are you, Julia? How are you?
I'm really well, Billy. Thank you so much for inviting me today.
No worries at all. I'm really excited. So for this session, we are going to be diving into the very exciting looking new attraction, Monopoly Lifesized in the heart of London. Before we delve into that and the development and what we can expect, a little bit about yourself and your history with brands. How did your role sounds like an incredibly exciting one for anyone to be part of. So how did you find yourself working with brands in this space?
Oh, that's a good question. So I've worked in brands pretty much all my life. I was at the BBC for 13 years, BBC, what was worldwide, now called Studios, working on some of the BBC iconic brands such as Teletubbies, First Time Round, In the Night Garden, Top Gear, Doctor Who, Strictly Come Dancing. So brands has kind of been my DNA really, and how that works and how to get the best out of an IP for the consumer and for the public. So yeah, always worked on brands, worked in publishing for many years, and worked on taking an adaptation of a book when I was in publishing called Guess How Much I Love You. And we did a play with a company was then called Celador, David Hutchinson. And when I decided to do a big career change, come out of TV, come out of publishing, I thought theatre would be something interesting to go into. Approached David, CEO, and we thought that would be a good idea to bring my TV background, my publishing background to the theatre world and to see what we could do with that. And so that's kind of the weird way as everyone's careers, you could never predict these things, but that's how I ended up with Celador. And then we created a company called Gamepath, which is essentially for the experience side of the industry. So that's how I got into brands.
Amazing, very cool. And so Monopoly Life-Size, I think people in their minds will have ideas about what experiences look like. They might have been to escape rooms and sort of have a feel for these sort of things. But how would you describe what this experience is?
Oh, so it's kind of like nothing else that exists really. We've taken over this amazing space in Tottenham Court Road, which was the Paper Chase building, and we've created 4 boards. And each board is different, and every room off the board is different as well. So it was a huge undertaking. Well, essentially, you're going to be bringing, the only way to say it is bringing Monopoly to life. So the tokens are actually actors dressed up as tokens. So you could have Scotty Dog, you could have Iron, and your token is going to kind of be your guide essentially around the life-size board. And depending on where you land, you then have to do a challenge in an escape type room. I will confirm that there is a jail that you do have to escape from.
I was going to ask.
No, there's a kind of, and people have been tempted to sleep in the jail. It's got a nice comfy bed in there. So when we have late nights working here, we do sometimes sneak in there. And then you play, and there's essentially, all of you are competing against, you're in a group and your group is competing against the other groups. And at the end, the winner is the person with the most money and the most assets, essentially.
Amazing. That sounds great. So I literally would, if I land on a space, there's a door, I go into a room.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Exactly. And we've tried to, the creators of the games have really drawn on the history of the locations and taken elements of the history. And that's the great thing about London, of course, is that, it's a plethora of things to source from. So each of the games is relevant. So Fleet Street, there's a relevant Fleet Street game. King's Cross involves shoveling coal. I don't want to give too many things away, but there's lots of kind of appropriate games for each room.
Amazing. It sounds amazing. And so I'm interested, Monopoly as a game, everyone knows it. As a brand, it's been doing so many amazing brand extensions as well. So for your team and the creative team at Gamepath, what did those first few steps look like in translating Monopoly into this sort of experience? Because there are so many different strings you could pull on for the brand to bring into your world.
Exactly. Well, there was a lot of scratching of heads at the beginning because, when you talk to people about Monopoly and just ask them what it means to them, it could be an epic 5-hour game with their family and someone throwing the board at the end of it. That's kind of hard to replicate. But also there's this amazing age range as well that you're dealing with. So, you know, how do you make something that's still fun for an 8-year-old and it's still fun for an 80-year-old or a 40-year-old or a bunch of 20-year-olds? So that was one of the challenges. So essentially, everyone played a lot of Monopoly for a very long time, and we just kept taking elements of it, iconic moments, and some of the challenges. You know, how are we going to replicate money? How are we going to replicate, you know, the going around the board but not being there for 4 hours? All of these things that kind of went through our heads. And then we spent a lot of time with Hasbro. You know, they're the owner of the IP. No one knows the brand better than they do. And we just really kind of broke it down element by element. Which are the things that we had to include? Which are the things that maybe wouldn't be fun to play as well? So that's what we did. It was a lot of playing the game, really.
Yeah, amazing. And then in terms of the actual development of each game and things like that, and also the space, was it a lot of sort of, I imagine, you know, these sort of things, making sure the games work, making sure people can do them, making sure there's still that challenge. Was there a lot of sort of trial and error in terms of getting the games?
Yeah, so the way we did it was, as a team, people would come up with ideas, then we'd kind of each challenge those ideas as much as we could and try and break them and try and come up, but equally where something worked as to how do we amplify that and how do we make it even better. And then we would build them kind of in small versions, then we would test it. And then once we actually had our building, it made a huge difference. So that testing process took kind of 18 months, 2 years, during which, of course, there was the unmentionable pandemic, which, just to kind of make things even a little bit more complicated, throw that into the mix. But once we could actually map it out and physically start to create it and do dummy runs, and then we had to test it, and we got, you know, all the people who work in the company came and did lots and lots of testing. Then we couldn't test physically because we couldn't actually physically all be together, so we had to test remotely. Then we could physically do it again in small groups. You know, these were all some of the challenges. Then we built it once we had the boards. Then we had the Axis test it. Then we had Hasbro testing it. So there's so much refinement that was going on and on and on. But the truth is, until you open to the general public, you just don't know. I mean, we did as much as we possibly could, but the general public are the arbiters at the end of the day, and they were the ones who were going to tell us whether it worked or didn't work. Yeah,
amazing. And then I'm interested. Obviously, this is a big space, London. You know, a big draw. So I'm intrigued. Monopoly, the brand. Obviously, there's loads of board games out there. There's loads of companies, big companies that have board game brands. What was it about the Monopoly brand that you thought that, you know, this is going to be one that suits this location? It'll bring people in. Why was the actual brand itself a perfect fit for what you guys are trying to do?
Yes, so we're working with Hasbro on a pipeline of content. So it's not just going to be Monopoly. We're going to be working with them on other IP. But because this was the first time we'd been going into something like this, we wanted to take a brand that had huge brand awareness. And of all the IP brand awareness, I'd say Monopoly is probably the one that's got the highest awareness. Of course, when we planned this, we wanted to also do something that had a global awareness, because for us, it's just London's just the start. We want to roll this out globally. And so also, because London used to be the centre of tourism, we wanted to have a brand that people, you didn't have to live in London or you didn't have to live in the UK, you could come and just recognise it immediately and still be able to play the game. Now, of course, we're now focusing on domestic tourists rather than international tourists, but hopefully that will change. But Monopoly was definitely the one with the biggest global appeal.
Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing I should say about the building itself, like you say, it's a big space. And there is actually also a complimentary, there's like a bar.
Oh, yeah. So that's the other thing we decided to do, because it's never enough just to take on the challenge of creating 4 boards. So we did, first of all, there's 4 boards, not 1. 3 of them are for adults. 1 of them is specifically the junior board, and that's been targeted for 5 to 8-year-olds. And we work with an educational experts and children's experts and teachers, and just making sure that was absolutely essentially key stage 1 that was going to work for them. And then there's the 3 adult boards, as I said. And then we thought, wouldn't it be great to open a Monopoly bar and restaurant as well? So, which is called the Top Hat. So we took on the challenge of that and have created these amazing cocktails again, all based around different streets, all based around different themes. And Monopoly food. So the food is essentially British small plates as well, because obviously we're the London Monopoly. And so we've got a stunning bar and restaurant, which has been a huge hit. Actually has been proven to be really helpful for us, because one of the challenges when you're trying to get a lot of people in, basically we're doing games every 15 minutes. We've got a lot of people that we've got to try and get into the boards and then off the boards as well. And so actually having a bar and restaurant fortuitously is actually a great space for people to both come into. If they come in early, they've got a place they can sit and enjoy the space. And then after they've been in the Monopoly world, they don't have to leave that world and go onto Tottenham Court Road. They can leave that world and extend it into the bar and restaurant. So, and there's also a retail shop as well. Of course, no experience would be right without a retail space. So yeah, we've tried to think of everything.
Amazing. And on the bar thing, one thing I wanted to mention is that it's quite what I found interesting is that it doesn't look like a sort of gimmicky themed bar. It's a very sophisticated. So was it a case of actually drawing on, Monopoly, the in world of Monopoly is obviously quite sophisticated,
Yeah, so we actually looked at the history of Monopoly and that kind of the time when Monopoly came about, and that was during the Depression, and it was all around banks, and it was all around, so we actually drew on some of the storyboards and the themes from the historic original versions of Monopoly, and that's what's inspired it. So it's actually very beautiful. And it's kind of, there's vaults as you come in, there's top hats, obviously because it's top hat bar and restaurant. It's quite plush and quite lush. So yeah, but it's all been drawn on moments. And if you look on the wallpaper, there's kind of little secret top hats in there and little kind of Scotty dogs and all little things. So it's subtle, I would say. Yeah. But we did it really, again, we did it really carefully and did it hand in hand with our restaurant designers, top of their game, and also with Hasbro to make sure that, we wanted it to be fun. And then it's essentially two halves, and the back is really, I would say, more for the families and for the kids. And again, we've tried to come up with lots of fun things on the wallpaper and things for people to do.
Amazing. No, it looks fantastic.
Oh, well, do come and have a cocktail.
Yeah, absolutely will. Absolutely. And I think it's the sort of thing for anyone in toys and games. I think, venue hire wise, there might be a lot of Christmas parties eventually. It seems to be a go-to.
Well, I have to tell you, I mean, again, things you learn when you do this, we are absolutely blown away by the huge amounts of corporate inquiries and parties and everything that people want to come and experience, because you can hire the building, or you can hire the boards, or you can hire the bar and restaurant. And although we knew that would be something that would be popular, we've just been absolutely blown away by how popular that's been.
Yeah, I can absolutely imagine. And then one thing I wanted to touch on is, we cover both on Mojo and Brands Untapped at the moment, quite a lot of brands either exploring live experiences and things like that. Do you think as a sector, and obviously the stuff that your team is focused on, do you think brands, be it toy and game brands, but also, other brands, food and drink brands, other brands, do you think this is a space that brand owners should be looking at engaging with teams like yourselves on creating these sort of experiences? Is there a lot of potential here?
I mean, the potential is phenomenal, I have to say. I mean, it's not quick, it's not easy. I mean, nothing done well is. And for us, it's about really getting under the DNA of the brand. And obviously, the more that the IP owners understand their own brands, of course, everyone likes to think they do, but when you rigorously test it, it's really important that it's not just enough to have a nice game or a nice IP. It's like, will it extend? Can you genuinely extend it in a way that doesn't feel artificial? No one wants to do brand slapping. No one wants to do anything that doesn't feel that's value for money for people. The consumer, the British consumer, or any consumers, understand that, when they're being sold something that's not quite right. So we really have to make sure that everything we do works. That being said, when you have the right IP, it's brilliant. And if it has a lot of gaming within it already, obviously that's really helpful. But we are looking at some really interesting IP that maybe you wouldn't expect to go into that space, which I can't talk about just yet. But there's loads of really exciting IPs that we're talking about. Some with game companies, some with film companies, and as I said, and the main thing is to make sure that people there's a huge brand awareness wherever possible, just because it's such an expensive exercise to go into. Explaining it, if you have to explain it too much early on, that's kind of barrier to entry as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and is that quite a fun creative challenge for you guys in terms of when you're working on a brand, like you say, that potentially doesn't have maybe a clear and obvious game element or connection to your space? Do you guys quite like that thing?
Oh yeah, well we absolutely love a challenge, but yeah, I think you discover very, very quickly when something just doesn't work, and equally, you know, there's no point kind of trying to make something work that just doesn't. Yeah. But equally, something that's a challenge is really helpful.
Yeah, amazing. And then one of my last questions is in terms of your team. Obviously, it's a huge undertaking, as we've spoken about. What helps you guys have ideas? What helps your team stay creative? What sort of tops up that creative tank for you guys?
Well, I think there's just a plethora of content out there at the moment. So podcasts, YouTube, film, television, books, theatre, you know, anywhere where there is good ideas out there, we just take it, you know, magazines, all of these are kind of great sources of inspiration for us. And we all have, within the team, we all have different favorites, we all have different areas that we all like, and actually having that kind of range is really, really helpful as well. So yeah, we're not really kind of, we try and have within the team people who have different things that they like, so that we're not all just kind of doing the same things over and over again. Yeah,
that makes sense. And then I'm interested, last thing, obviously people that are watching this, there's going to be sort of two audiences I want to address. There's going to be people that think this sounds amazing, love to go, you know, let's get that experience booked. How can they do that? And then the second thing I wanted you to sort of address is any brands out there, whether it's toy and game brands, but also, you know, other brands that think, you know what, this sort of experience sounds great. I'd love to speak with a team about whether they could maybe adapt ours. How would they get in touch as well?
So we're often people often reach out to us, and we have lots of conversations. You know, we're really, really happy to talk to people all the time. Like I said, it's really making sure that people are kind of coming to us with ideas or IP that is already established up to a level, because the amount of money that one has to invest, obviously we have to raise the money too. If the brand doesn't have a high recognition, I think it's going to be hard to kind of raise that capital. You know, there's also the challenge of finding the spaces, and also landlords want to kind of have that reassurance that if you're going into the space, that you've got a brand that's going to have that value attached to it. That being said, I think there's lots of kind of quirky ones that we can do, and not everything has to be in central London. You know, we're trying to do things that maybe are slightly outside of centre as well, but again, that there is a high recognition value. But people can just approach us directly. We're really friendly. We're really open to ideas. And yeah, we just love meeting people who've got great IP, and we just kind of, you know, we just have a hunger to kind of develop as much as we can. We have a very full slate for the next few years, but we will always find space for the best.
Great stuff. And then one thing you said there that prompted a thought. Do you think that obviously after the pandemic, there are a lot of, you know, empty spaces, either high street spaces or in town centres and things like that? Do you think actually there is an opportunity that brands can play a role in bringing a bit of life to these spaces with experiences like what you're doing?
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, you know, how are these streets, or how are these councils going to kind of reinvigorate the high street? And we definitely want to be part of that. So like I said, we're not just focusing on London, we're focusing all around the UK. There are these big spaces. We've taken over the Paper Chase building here. That being said, some of the councils also want to try and have retail. So the fact that we had a retail component was really helpful for them into kind of handing over the space. But yeah, absolutely. You know, having queues down the street to come into a building is a good look on any high street. So and that's what we're aiming to have, and already have started to have here.
Absolutely. No, and anyone interested, head to monopolylifesized.com. There'll be all the information on there. Julia, thank you so much for this. I can't wait to give it a go. It looks.
Oh, you're so welcome. Anyone's really welcome. Just come along. And like I said, we've got 3 boards running at the moment. Fourth about to join, and a great bar and restaurant that you can have a lovely cocktail and food.
Perfect. Count me in. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much, and thank you guys for watching. And hopefully, we'll all catch up again very soon.
Thank you so much.